We all must have heard the story of that poor, hungry man begging on the side of the river. He lived on the generosity of fishermen who would, every now and then, give him a fish. Until one day he went begging to a new fisherman with a basket full of big and beautiful fish to give him one fish. The man looked at him and said, "My dear friend, I'm sorry. I cannot give you any of my fish, but I'll give you something much better." And he gave him his own fishing rod and started teaching the beggar how to fish himself. It was not long before the man started catching his own fish. He was no longer a beggar. In today's gospel, Jesus plays the beggar with the Samaritan woman near Jacob's well. She was shocked that Jesus, a Jew, would beg her, a Samaritan woman, for a drink. Jews were so convinced that they had it all. After all, they were the chosen people of God, whereas the Samaritans, they were heretics, sinners, fake Jews. In this passage, Jesus seems to radically change his role. Instead of being the provider, he becomes himself the needy beggar, even if a curious and very different kind of beggar. He tells the woman, "If you knew the gift of God, if you only knew what kind of beggar is asking you for water, you would have asked me to give you water." In other terms, he was telling her, "I am the beggar and at the same time the giver, all in one. You are thirsty for something that is much more precious than the water in the well. You are thirsty for some real meaningfulness in your life. That's your real thirst. You're thirsty for someone who loves you fully, unconditionally. And touching the big wound in the woman's heart, he pressed on, "Where is your husband? You have tried out 5 of them, and you have failed in all instances." Why did she fail in all these marriages, in all these attempts to find fullness and happiness? What was she doing wrong? Her big mistake was that she had thought that a husband would make her happy and give her all that she was thirsty for. And instead, she failed with all her husbands. This is the greatest and most painful mistake that we all make in life, when we rely on someone else to make us happy. So we remain beggars, asking for someone to save us from our needs, our misery and pain. Someone to listen to us, understand us, support us, live for us, provide us with our emotional and other needs. And that means that we remain like the helpless beggar of the story, hoping to live on the goodness and on the kindness of others. This was too hard for the woman to face and to admit. So she tried to change the subject and started an argument over some kind of irrelevant technicality over which the Jews and the Samaritans had been fighting for years. Which temple is the real temple where God dwells? Was it the one the Jews had built in Jerusalem, or the temple that the Samaritans had built on Mount Gerizim? As usual, we human beings avoid the real question by creating a false problem, a false question, start a conflict, and let the stronger win the bet. That's human. And Jesus loved the Samaritan woman too much to allow her to avoid and escape the real question. He simply dismisses all controversies between Samaritans and Jews over their stone temples to concentrate on the only temple where God really dwells, the very heart of the Samaritan woman. God is spirit, says Jesus, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Why are so many people dying of thirst? It's because they want to quench their thirst with water that others would give them. They seek to live by what the world outside can offer them: money, success, fame, power. But all this, like the water Jesus speaks of, will never quench our thirst. It is just water, and not the living water that Jesus speaks of. However much we have of what the world esteems and craves for, the more we become thirsty, the more we feel dissatisfied, incomplete, frustrated. Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I shall give will never thirst. The water I shall give will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The well that will never dry up is the spirit-filled human heart that keeps welling up like an eternal spring, like an inexhaustible source of new life, God himself. St. Paul says it so beautifully to the Corinthians. Don't you know that you are God's temple? That God's Spirit dwells in your midst? For God's temple is sacred, and together you are that temple. All things are yours, whether the world or life or death or the present or the future, all are yours, and you are of Christ, and Christ is of God. If only we believed and accepted this inner dignity and blessing that God has already given us as His children, we would surely be free from the terrible pressures that the outside world puts on us. Realizing that God's kingdom is indeed within us is discovering the peace we all are so thirsty for. What the world needs is not greater amounts of resources, water, fish, money, power, comforts. If we dig deeper within us, we will find that we already have all that we need to live full and beautiful lives. Instead of grabbing, we will start giving. Instead of exploiting and destroying resources, we will start caring for what we have. Instead of polluting our world, we will restore it to life. And instead of eliminating the inconvenient ones, we will warmly welcome them among us. This is God's kingdom on earth. We need not wait for the end of times to make it happen. Let's start making it happen today in our homes, workplaces, streets, offices, institutions. God's kingdom will be among us if and when we will no longer need to beg for a fish to survive. It is when we will have become expert fishermen and fisherwomen, feeding our brothers and sisters and ourselves from the superabundance of God's loving gifts. Thank you and God bless you.